In the early 12th century, Norway stood at a crossroads. The country, unified for little over a century, was ruled by King Sigurd I, better known as Sigurd the Crusader. His reign from 1103 to 1130 was marked by military prestige, relative stability, and a notable journey to the Holy Land that would earn him his legendary title. Sigurd became the first European king to lead a crusade, traveling across Europe and even reaching Jerusalem around 1110. But while Sigurd's exploits abroad were remarkable, his domestic affairs laid the groundwork for a period of internal strife. Sigurd had no legitimate son. Instead, he acknowledged an illegitimate child named Magnus, born around 1115. In 1129, Sigurd took the unusual step of proclaiming the teenage Magnus as co-king, ruling alongside him in his final years. When Sigurd died in 1130, Magnus inherited the throne. Magnus was born around the year 1115, during the reign of his father King Sigurd the Crusader. Unlike many royal sons of Europe, Magnus was not born to a queen or noble consort. His mother was an unnamed concubine, and Magnus was considered illegitimate by the traditional standards of European succession. But in 12th century Norway, the concept of legitimacy was more flexible. What mattered most was the bloodline, and Magnus, as the only known son of a reigning king, had a strong claim to be heir. Sigurd, despite his fame as a crusading monarch, was not particularly invested in long-term dynastic planning. He never married officially and never sought to secure a legitimate successor through formal alliances. We don't know much about his mother or the specific details of his childhood, but we do know that by the late 1120s, as King Sigurd's health began to decline, attention turned towards succession. When Sigurd died in 1130, Magnus inherited the throne outright. He was now King Magnus IV of Norway. But his reign would be tested almost immediately, not by rebellion from within, but by a challenge from across the sea. Within months, a rival appeared, Harald Gille, a man from Ireland who claimed to be a son of King Magnus Barefoot, Sigurd's father. If true, this made him Magnus's uncle. To verify Harald's claim, the Norwegians subjected him to an ordeal by fire, a common medieval test of truth. When Harald emerged unscathed, or at least alive, the nobles accepted his lineage. But rather than seizing the throne by force, Harald agreed to rule jointly with Magnus beginning in 1130. The two kings promised peace, dividing power, but within 2 years, civil war erupted. In 1134, Magnus gained the upper hand. At the Battle of Farlev, he defeated Harald's forces and regained sole control of the kingdom. Harald fled to Denmark, but rather than pressing the advantage, Magnus made a fateful decision. He disbanded much of his army. When Harald returned later that year with Danish support, Magnus was unprepared. The two clashed again, this time near Bergen. Magnus lost. What followed was not only a defeat, but a brutal humiliation. Harald captured Magnus and ordered him blinded, castrated, and partially mutilated. Magnus was then sent to live in a monastery, effectively removed from power. This earned him the epithet by which he is known today, Magnus the Blind. Magnus spent the next decade in religious obscurity, but the civil wars that had begun with his fall continued to rage. Harald Gille was himself murdered in 1136, and Norway fell into a period of dynastic chaos. One of Harald's sons, Inge I, eventually emerged as king, alongside his brothers Sigurd and Eystein. By the mid-1140s, Magnus re-entered the stage. In 1139, Magnus escaped or was released from monastic life. Backed by certain factions of the nobility still loyal to his father's legacy, he raised an army and once again sought the throne. In this second phase of his political life, Magnus allied with Sigurd Slem, yet another pretender claiming royal blood. Together, Magnus and Sigurd launched a campaign to regain control of Norway. But the kingdom was now under the rule of Inge I and his brothers. In 1139, Magnus and Sigurd were defeated at the Battle of Holmengrå, near modern-day Valur. The battle was decisive and brutal. Magnus was killed in combat, and Sigurd Slem was captured, tortured, and executed. Magnus the Blind died in 1139, around the age of 25. His life was shaped by dynastic conflict, a brief kingship cut short by betrayal and cruelty, and a failed attempt at restoration. His reign, though often overshadowed by his dramatic downfall, marked the beginning of a long and violent period in Norwegian history known as the Civil War era, which would last for over a century.